First of all, welcome. We're excited to spend some time with you this afternoon and discuss the 5 hurdles of test automation. This webinar is sponsored by the testing consultancy, TTC. And if you have not heard of us, TTC believes business efficiency and the delivery of high-quality technology relies on 3 main components: capable people, robust processes, and the best technology. We also know this often isn't simple, which is why we're here to partner with you on your digital transformation journey. We work with clients to help them find the right mix of people, processes, and technology for their organization, and we bring our knowledge and experience to ensure seamless testing operations in your company's software development lifecycle. If you would like more information, please visit us at www.testingconsultancy.com. Your speakers today include myself, Carla Hartman. I will be moderating your webinar. I am the Manager of Customer Success for TTC based in Houston, Texas. This means I oversee several areas, 2 being marketing and account management. I have over 15 years experience in marketing and account management, 3 of those which have been in the software and services field. Outside of work, I enjoy intelligent conversations, yoga, dance, and I believe I'm the #1 fan of LeBron James. The star of the show today and the main presenter is Nate Custer. He is a thought leader in the QA space. Nate is not only a senior consultant at TTC, but a systems architect, QA automation lead, and developer of tools and testing. In his spare time, Nate attends many local QA meetups and enjoys reading, sipping scotch, and watching the Manchester United Football Club. Before we dive into the good stuff, please ensure your microphones are on mute. We apparently ensured that as well, hence the technical difficulties. But during the webinar, if you have questions, we've got your answers. But we'd like you to kindly type in those questions into the chat functionality on your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll answer them at the end. Any questions we cannot get to, we will respond via email. Once again, thank you, and thank you for sticking with us through the technical difficulty. Without further ado, I'll pass it off to Nate.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Carla, for getting this set up and helping to coordinate it. And thanks for sticking with us through these technical difficulties. For me, I've, as Carla said, worked on a number of test automation projects over the last 15 years, some that were successful and some that had a lot of challenges. And so when I thought about that, I thought that we could talk about what those challenges were and how you can overcome them so you don't make the same mistakes that we've made here. I think, though, that, well, let me go back a second. Let's start at the beginning. Why do you automate testing? There are a lot of reasons to do it. I listed a few of them here. Even as simple as humans make mistakes, like with an S, and I typed one in without that, right? Computers are great at doing exactly what you tell them, making sure that we do that and we can retain accuracy long term. This talk, though, is going to go and look at something a little more basic. I think these are all great reasons to automate tests, and you'll hear them talk, but when it comes to purchasing decisions, you decide to invest a lot of money on test automation based on a really simple proposition. So let's look at that proposition. That proposition is that test automation will save you time in your build validation. As you do more releases, that time will add up. And so that time will, long term, you're almost guaranteed a return on investment, right? The number of releases goes up over time, the cost stays the same. Even if it costs twice as much as you originally thought it did, you'll get good at the end. It's one of those things, in fact, it looks so obvious, you have to ask, why doesn't everyone do test automation? Why don't we automate all the things? If you see a chart, it looks so simple, right? It's obvious. That's the promise. And somehow, test automation projects fail, even though that's that simple. I saw one study recently that said 60% of all test automation projects fail to deliver on the projected ROI. If it's that simple, how can we fail? That kind of question really caught my eye. maybe want to think a lot longer and think back through all the projects I've worked on, the ones that succeeded and those failures, to see if we can figure out what that is, I have this really simple thesis. The core hurdles for test automation projects are the blind spots of that model, right? What are the things that simple model misses that we can highlight going forward? My hope in this talk is really look at 5 of those hurdles through the whole life cycle of a test automation project. Make sure that you understand what could happen or what could go wrong, and give you some questions that you can think about in your own specific context to make sure that you leap over them and finish the race with the success. So with that being said, let's go ahead and turn to those test authoring hurdles. The first one is complex test authoring. I think that you can actually get this one really simply. So I saw this is a tweet from Tom Eastman, a great Kiwi developer. Because I have a Python program I run every day, takes 1.5 seconds to run. I spent 6 hours rewriting it in Rust. Now it takes 6/100ths of a second. That improvement means I'll make back my time in 41 years and 24 days. And I thought, that's got to be an exaggeration, right? It only took him 6 hours. He's got to get it sooner than that. I ran the numbers. That's exactly what you come out to if you save 1.5 seconds every day. Why is a test authoring tool or system too complex for your team? There are a number of reasons why. I break them down into 3 categories. If the tool that you've picked requires more scripting or programming than the skills of your team, it's not a good fit. But even if you've got a tool that your team can totally do, if setting up the test environment requires skills or resources you don't have, you're still going to struggle. And even if you get the test environment and the test tool right, if the test data is too complex or it's too hard to get really valid data, great automation fails. And the regulations that have come around that can make data even more challenging. What does that look like on that chart? Well, 2 things. First off, our costs go up, and the actual return value gets less. So one side you can see this on is if it takes you a month to automate 3 tests instead of a week, you don't get the same return. The inverse is that if you can only automate 5% of all your tests, it will take you a lot longer to get here. Now, I've been in some situations where this happened, and I got to be honest, we were really lucky to be at a company that had a fat margin, and they gave us time, but they invested 2 years from the time we started doing test automation to the time that we were actually just breaking even on the investment. Most companies will pull the plug way faster than that and fire everyone. It's dangerous stuff. So what can you do to prevent this? I would propose a really simple test. And I call it the manager test, because you've got most teams, the most technical person isn't the manager. If the manager can read the test and can watch how test automation is done, and they can reasonably expect to do a simple test, I'm pretty confident that the technical skills are aimed at the right set for the team. Another great way to ask around the test complexity is, does it get easier to write tests over time, or does it take the same amount of effort for every test? Your team's skills should go up, but really good test frameworks for test automation or good tools will actually have ways to make it so that subsequent tests can build on the infrastructure you've already put together. It's a key factor. So congratulations, you've got some tests. You jumped the first hurdle, right? You've got tests. Let's talk about maintenance for a second. What is maintenance? Maintenance gets down to this really simple thing that the basic test automation premise misses. And that is, tests are valuable not for software you've already released. Tests are really valuable for software that you've changed, right? Once you've released it, whatever it is. So test automation is only valuable when you change stuff. If you change the software under test, you also have to change your tests. It seems so basic, but at the time that you spend updating your tests to run on a new version, is greater than the time that you save running those tests, you haven't actually gained any time. And this can seem like, oh, that's like a rounding error, right? And maybe if you have a few tests, what happens as the tests grow? So in one project I was on, we used a record and capture tool for testing, and this is kind of what it looked like. The record and capture tool was really fast at automating tests. It was cheap to automate tests. The problem was we had a maximum number of tests we could automate before you had to go back and recapture everything all over again. So that same bed of tests, we got some things automatically tested, and we could never get past that. There's a cap on how far we could get. That cap brings down your ROI, and it can actually crush your project, right? What are some things you can ask about that? I always try two really simple things here. If a locator changes on the screen, if the element changes, how many times do I have to change that in my tests? If one locator causes you to change the 50 tests that I'll talk about it, you're going to struggle with test maintenance. If it's one locator means one change, it'll be way easier. The other way is what happens if the process changes. So locators are all the same, but the process, hey, there's one more thing. Like we add two-factor authentication to a login page. How many tests have to be re-recorded? How many tests have to be updated? If you can update once and you're done, great. If you have to update lots and lots of times, that will hurt you at scale. So let's say we got over those two hurdles, right? We've got tests, we can maintain those tests, we're good to go, we're seeing a return on investment, right? Not quite so soon. Ultimately, tests are valuable if they tell you something's broken and you believe it. Test automation fundamentally comes down to a thing of trust. And with test automation, I've seen a really simple process happen. When you introduce test automation to a dev team or to a software process, the first thing everyone does is blame the tests, right? Hey, no one wants to hear that the product is broken. Everyone's looking to hear some other reason this could be wrong, right? Everyone's looking to blame somebody else. And the tests, being the newest thing there, will get the blame initially. What's more, if you have tests that sometimes work and sometimes fail on the exact same bit of software, that will undermine all the trust and credibility you have. The return on investment comes when it's the time that you've saved from validation adds up. What frequently happens with brittle and flapping tests is that you run the automation and then you go back and manually check everything, right? If you have to recheck that stuff, you end up anywhere. I think there are kind of three big causes for brittle and flapping tests. It's something that haunts everyone who does test automation. We all struggle with it. The core one is actually race conditions or synchronization. Just as importantly, third-party services. So I worked for a billing software company at one point in time, and we checked that our software could send an invoice to PayPal, and PayPal could capture that payment and give it back to us. And my test automation was great until PayPal changed their interface. And no amount of good process on our side is going to catch the fact that PayPal could change stuff, or PayPal could have a problem and be down. And PayPal Sandbox is one of the best, just so we're clear. Another one that frequently catches people is date time complexity. If you do calculations like pro rata invoicing, does your calculation for your test include what happens when there's a leap year? That actually burned me more than once. So if the tests all fail, there's no race condition issues, and it's not a third-party service, I check the calendar. You'd be surprised how often it comes up. So what's that ROI look like? What ends up happening if you have too many flapping tests is that everyone simply starts ignoring the tests. You can have your investment, you can be building progress. It's maybe slower than you'd expect, but at some point it just stops. Worse than stopping is when it becomes noise that they actively ignore. There's no worse feeling in the world than shipping software and having a customer find a defect, and you said, did we test that? Yes, we did, we just didn't believe it. That, I still resent those times where I did that, right? It hurts. There are a lot of questions for what can help you narrow down brittleness, because brittleness is one of those problems. I'm not going to read all of them. We are providing the slides as part of a handout. You can go back and go through those. The key things are, can you refine selectors really carefully? When you find those places, do you have ways to state weight and synchronization stuff? And do you have recovery options? All three of those are really helpful. So you've gotten to the point where your tests are running great. They're trusted, they're believed, people depend on them. That's fantastic. That's when the next challenge really pops up. And this hurdle is about speed. If you write lots of tests, they'll take a long time to run. And in fact, they'll take so long to run that you have to make a decision before they're finished running. And sometimes people come to you and say, hey, how long is it going to take to get that answer? What if we need this to ship this right now? It's causing chaos every minute of every day. I've worked in an environment where we had someone release a 0-day vulnerability. And the question was, what's the bare minimum of testing we have to do to get this out the door? Because every minute that we hold on to a fix, new customers are getting compromised. So parallelization is the obvious way that you speed tests up. Computers are great. You can do things in parallel. It's the obvious computer science answer. How fast do you want to go? As many computers as you need, man. It's just money, right? Except there are some things that will undermine your tests if you haven't designed them right. There are, I call them 3 key factors for execution of tests around this. One of them is that every test should do all of its stuff independently. It shouldn't rely on other tests. If test A has to have test B run after, or test B requires test A, when you run A in one place and B on a different place, your tests start failing. Another is to make sure that instead of hard coding all your values, that you can pass in parameters. So instead of having 2 tests that operate on the same user, that may be fine when you're going in serial because you're not changing the user. When you go to different users, you want those different tests to have different base users to operate on. The last and the most difficult to understand is a concept called global state. And so I want to expand on that one just a little bit. For this, I need a thought experiment, and this one is completely made up. Let's say that you're working for a company that's founded out of New Zealand, just randomly. That's where the central office is. You work in the Houston office. You want a little program to make sure that when you schedule meetings, that your Houston folks schedule meetings, that they're not at the middle of the night for the Kiwis, right? This is just a simple example. How would you do that? Don't write code, but just think, how might you do that? I propose there are fundamentally 3 approaches. One looks at your time, looks at the time on the system, the time zone you're in, translates it to Kiwi time. Another says, I don't know what time zone you're in. Maybe that's different. How about you tell me what time zone you're in and what time you care about? We'll go. The last one takes 2 arguments. If you're talking about global state is things that you pull out of the environment you're running in. Tests should be designed to adapt to whatever global state is. If your test has to set the global state be something specific, you end up and you change that for your test. When you get to parallelization, you'll have different tests changing the global state at different times. It undermines all your efforts. What's that look like for ROI? Things going along pretty well. You got more tests. Like, yes, now we need them fast. And you have to redo all your work. You start all over again. When you're avoiding and thinking of how you prevent tests from parallel, or the parallelization hurdle from tripping you up, it's really key to think about it early in the process and to ask questions about parallel parameterization, being atomic, and really good test design. For me, parallelization, most test tools can handle it, but the operator needs to know how to do it well. Test design, it's about the skill of the user more than the tool. So this last one for me is interoperability. As you start to advance your test suite, you're going to want to test at different levels and to do different kinds of testing. So we start automation frequently at user acceptance testing or at unit testing, and both those are very helpful. Then you want to add in API testing, and then you want to add in performance monitoring, and then you want to add in other stuff. What you end up with is this kind of, or what you can do if you do it wrong, is you say, I want the best in breed tool for each one of these things. And then you have to glue all those tools together. It seems like a great idea, right? We should always use the best thing for the tool, best tool for the job, fit for purpose. That glue code and that glue work is one of those hidden things that will pop up and burn you. And so you either end up not having all the data in one picture and not being able to see it, or you can end up in situations where you don't even get the feedback from one of the tools because you don't know to look for it. Automated testing and testing in general is about transparently communicating the state of the software to the broader community to make decisions. If they can't see or understand the results you're giving them because they're buried on some system somewhere over there, you haven't met your purpose. You will not get that return on investment. What's it look like? If you get interoperability wrong, every time you add a new tool, you'll have to tweak more things. The costs just keep going up and up and up and up, and it becomes really an unmaintainable burden. It's great at the start, best in breed sounds awesome, but if you haven't thought about what's the best, most cohesive tool that can give me everything I need at once, if you don't plan for the future and where you're going to go and how these all work together, you're stuck doing this passes to this, which transforms to that, which does this, which goes to here. Bubblegum, duct tape, not a well-engineered solution. So here are some of the questions you can ask. A great one is, how many different technologies are involved for our application? So do you need mobile testing? Do you need API testing? Do you need performance testing? Do you need characterization testing? All that stuff matters. Do you need to go from mainframe for your data all the way to the web into mobile applications, or are you just on one technology? Does your tool have answers for all of that? Not what you're going to start with, but where you need to be long-term. It's really important. So that kind of brings us to an end of our conversation. My hope is that if this has worked well, that you've been able to actually benefit from test automation. So with that being said, let's go ahead and pull up some of these questions and go from there. Carla, do you have any questions you want to kind of read for us?
Yes.
Chat?
We had a good question come through. Nate, you spoke about tools in an agnostic manner. Do you have any suggestions on some of the best in breed tools for test automation on the market right now?
So I want to start by saying, because it's a really important point, it's not just about the best tool on the market, it's the best tool that fits our specific situation and context. The first question I would typically ask is, do you want to go for a more scripted solution, programmer heavy, or do you want to go with an off-the-shelf tool and enterprise support? If you're doing that stuff, do you want to write your own framework or do you want to buy one? Both options make sense in different situations. Let me just say there's one tool that I've been playing with a lot lately that I'm excited about, and that's a tool called Tosca by Tricentis. I think that it handles some of these issues, especially around maintenance and around scalability and interoperability in really cool ways, and so I'm a fan.
What is the hurdle that most organizations most often struggle with?
I've seen the first two be the most often struggled with. And in fact, the first version of this slide called Test Complexity Hurdle Zero, because it's the one that if you don't get over, nothing else matters, right? But the first two I've seen, and especially maintenance, like you can pick a tool, you can write some initial tests. If you don't count the cost of maintenance, that'll really burn you.
And if you're a corporation trying to implement automation, what do you suggest you get to help you if you're just diving into this journey?
I'm a big fan of expertise. when I got into it the first time, I learned a lot of lessons, and I learned a lot of lessons by making mistakes. And like I said, I was lucky to be at a company that had the margin to think long term and absorb those mistakes. But I'm definitely, I think long term, find someone who's done this before, that's already paid that price. Like experience only comes by making mistakes. So someone else have learned that experience on someone else's dime.
And what's the best way to automate the tasks for desktop applications?
So most of my experience has been with web and web services. But for desktop applications, that's one of the things that excites me about Tosca, is that lots of web services aren't just about the web, right? So I recently bought a house and I used the mortgage company's web-based service, but I also downloaded a whole bunch of PDFs that it generated and then signed them with an e-sign program. No matter how great their web application stuff was, if I can't get those PDFs and sign them, you haven't met my need as a customer. And so being able to handle those desktop applications, those mainframe applications, as well as web and mobile is one of the reasons that Tosca excites me. Why I've been playing with it a lot lately.
Great. Well, that looks like all the questions we've had come in, and we hope this was informative for y'all. If you need to follow up with Nate or myself, please visit thetestingconsultancy.com. And thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to speak to each and every one of you in the future again. Have a good one.